Hey everybody, today we've got a couple of polls. We've got a fresh one out of Maryland now that Larry Hogan has entered that Senate race. But first, let's talk about Montana. This is a key Senate election this year that could determine the balance of power. And we haven't looked at this race lately, but we've got a poll and the news here that Matt Rosendale, he's dropping out of this Senate election. And this is notable because he declared he wanted to run for this seat just last week. You might remember Rosendale lost to incumbent Democrat Jon Tester by 3.5 back in 2018. But apparently after Donald Trump endorsed rival Tim Sheehy in the Republican primary, Rosendale decided he doesn't really have a path forward, so he's thrown in the towel. He also had a lack of funding, plus he already had a crack at it 6 years ago and he failed. So technically this is a good move for the Republicans. Now the frontrunner is going to be Sheehy. He still has to win that primary, but for the most part the GOP will avoid some bitter infighting. So Rosendale theoretically putting his party and his state ahead of himself. Even if he had the Trump endorsement, I'm not sure if he would have won anyway. Voters there already might consider him to be labeled as a failure. So Tim Sheehy and their other U.S. Senator Steve Daines, they're going to have favorable things to say about Rosendale now that he's no longer a competitor. But down at the bottom, this article also contains a recent poll from Survey USA. And in that race, Tester has a decisive advantage, 49-40. That's over both Sheehy and Rosendale. Now this poll was conducted with 700 adults, not registered or likely voters. And that was February 12th to the 15th, so it's recent. 612 of those were identified as registered to vote, and 549 determined to be likely voters. So it's very early, but Tester with a relatively huge lead as he goes for his fourth term. If you need a refresher, here's what he did back in 2018. Keep in mind, that was a blue wave year. Tester won by 3.5. He cleared 50%. Rosendale was under 47. And that was also the first time Tester actually surpassed 50% in his 3 wins. And if we jump ahead to this upcoming election, we still have to get through the primaries, but because Tester is so precariously close to 50%, Republicans had tried to switch to a top 2 primary system, only for this U.S. Senate election. Now, the intent of that is to make sure the Libertarian candidate does not make it to the general election and potentially spoil it for the Republican nominee. So that's probably a bit of dirty politics. I could see the Democrats doing the same thing if they were in a similar situation. Who knows exactly how much that would help or hurt. The positive thing I can say about it is nice to see somebody win a statewide election with a majority support. So it looks like this ended up not going through. So if we go down a little bit further, it doesn't look like anybody's challenging Tester in the primary, and he's got a ton of cash raised. He's got $25 million with $11 million sitting in the bank. Montana voters know Tester very well at this point. They've trusted him 3 times over 18 years. He's a reasonable fit for the state, but on some issues he's going to have some libertarian leanings, or he'll be willing to cross over and support it just enough so he can claim to be bipartisan, because of course on a presidential level this is a red state, so he has to tread carefully as a Democrat. So the Republican primary does have several candidates in the running, but the clear frontrunner is going to be Tim Sheehy. He's got the Trump endorsement, he's got a lot of U.S. senators behind him, he even has Governor Greg Gianforte. If you go down a little bit more, the campaign finance shows he has raised over $5 million, with $1 million of that of Sheehy's own funds. Now that primary is going to be June 4th, so we've got some time to see what happens, and we're going to need some new polling, but Sheehy was already ahead of Rosendale in these recent polls. Now that Rosendale is out, and with the Trump endorsement, I would imagine Sheehy would surge in these polls. There's still going to be some voters undecided. They probably don't know who Sheehy is just yet, but I'm sure he's getting out there more and more. He's got to try to balance out Tester's name recognition and funding. The general election polling, as I just covered, Tester is up 49-40. It's really early. I know I've heard a lot of Trump voters say that with the Trump turnout in this red state, there's no way Tester is going to be able to win another term. That's a possibility, but you really can't count Tester out. He's already pulled off 3 wins. He knows what he's doing. I'm sure voters trust him enough. It's going to be close. And according to the polling we've got so far, Tester is clearly winning. I'm sure a lot of that is because of name recognition. It's bound to narrow up, but there's no guarantee this is just going to be an instant flip for the GOP. So this is going to be a fascinating race. We're going to see what happens, but if you're looking for another potentially fascinating race, let's head back over to Maryland. We already heard the recent news that Larry Hogan is going to run for the U.S. Senate. He got in at the last second, and that at least puts this race on the map. Without Hogan, nobody was going to spend any time paying attention to this race. But now we've got a new poll from Emerson, and this was done with 1,000 registered voters. But so far, it's decent news for Hogan. There's still primaries to get through for both sides. That's on May 14th. And in that Republican primary, Hogan is getting 43% support. There's another another 43% that are undecided. Now, there's a lot of debate as to whether Larry Hogan is considered to be too moderate or too much of a rhino, that the Republican base is not going to support him in a primary. I can understand base voters thinking Hogan is weak, but at the same time, this is one of the bluest states out there. It's clear that without Hogan, there is at best a 0.1% chance this seat would flip. With Hogan, there's at least a chance, and maybe those primary voters stick to their principles and they don't want Hogan. It's not guaranteed, but I would think he's at least likely to become the nominee. Now, the Democrats, they have their own primary. David Trone has 32%, Angela Alsobrooks has 17%, 37% undecided. So Trone has a ton of money, and he is going to be stronger in the general election. Now, what about in the general? Well, if it was Angela Alsobrooks, Larry Hogan is ahead by 7 points, 44-37. In the more likely matchup, then it's a tied race. Both Hogan and Trone are at 42 with 16% undecided. Now, that's a positive sign for Hogan. And as I just said with Montana, there's a lot of time left. The whole dynamic of the race could change, but this is such a blue state on a federal level. Larry Hogan is not running for governor anymore, even though he's been very popular in the past. This is a different office. It's going to be a significant uphill climb for Hogan. He's going to need a lot of crossover support, and I would expect a lot of these undecideds would end up breaking for Trone, the Democrat. It doesn't mean Hogan can't win. He could get it down to single digits, but it's also still possible he loses by more than 15, which would be a massive improvement over the previous Senate margin or with any other Republican. So what else does this poll have to say? Well, Hogan is getting 48% of independents and nearly a quarter of Democrats. That's what he has to do to be competitive. He also cannot lose very many Republicans. This poll also says 46% of voters think the state is headed in the right direction, and 38% think it's on the wrong track. So that's a positive sign for the way things are going in the state. They also polled the general election between Biden and Trump. Not a surprise there. Biden is ahead by 23, 55-32, 13% undecided. In a third-party race, Biden's lead shrinks, but he still leads by 16, 47-31. Kennedy pulls in 6. West and Stein get 1%. So if that panned out, Biden would underperform what he did in 2020 by about 10 points. They ask about Biden's age. 54% say his age raises concern, while 46% say it's not a consideration. They ask about Trump's criminal indictments. 66% say that raises concerns, while it's not a consideration for 34%. The economy and crime are the two most important issues for Maryland voters. And down here at the bottom, you can always click here for the full results to get the crosstabs and the specific question wording. But that kind of sums up where we're at in Maryland as well as in Montana. 2 U.S. Senate races, one of them certainly critical with Tester in Montana. The other one with Hogan in Maryland, definitely not critical, but it's another place Democrats might have to spend some resources. But all we can do is wait and see. So let me know in the comments, what do you think about either of these two states? Is Tim Sheehy the right guy in Montana for the Republicans? How much is that race going to narrow as we get closer to the election? And what about Larry Hogan? Is he going to be the Republican nominee? Could he get it down under 10 points? How about 5 points? Let me know down below. On your way out, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Join if you'd like to support the channel. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.